Chapter 12, Parts 1 and 2. Chapter 12, Battlefield Kronus. Part 1. It would take time for the Imperium at large to take notice of the momentous events that unfolded on Kronus. First confirmed reports of the planet's new status as a shrine world would come from astropaths part of Task Force Nemesis, dispatched to answer a request for aid by General Lucas Alexander. To this day, those pious and sensitive enough could feel the God Emperor's touch upon Kronus. To those blessed enough to witness the events firsthand, it was, and I quote, "This is his divinity made manifest. A veil of light is shielding the whole world." The Emperor's direct intervention was more than enough to bless Kronus to the end of time. The events unfolding on the surface, and which might have warranted the attention of him on Holy Terror, were no less memorable than his intervention. An inquisitional task force, Imperial Guard elements under the overall command of General Lucas Alexander, and members of the Blood Ravens Adeptus Astartes faced a terrible traitor incursion and slew the heretic champion, Skull-Taker, Reaver of Armageddon, and Slayer of Astartes. A Pilgrim's Guide to Shrine World Kronus, 3rd edition, Victory Bay Publishing House, Deimos Peninsula. Kronus, Lieutenant Martin Vau was in his element. He was operating on a poor bastard, trying to stitch his guts back inside where they belonged, when a commotion rang alarm bells in his head. The last time, Tau war beasts tried to eat him and his patients. What was this time? Demons. LT, a bunch of Astartes just arrived with high-priority casualties. Your expertise is needed right now. I'm busy, Martin snapped. The Inquisitor requires your attention, Medicae. An impossibly deep voice rumbled just outside the operation theater. What did he do to himself this time? The surgeon exclaimed. I was barely able to put him back together the last time. We had a close encounter with a powerful demon. The Astartes, because who else would have such a voice, blithely explained. Did you at least banish the fucker so he won't come here to eat my patients? I'll be taking over, LT. Go see the Inquisitor. The captain in charge of the field hospital announced. I'll be there in a moment. I can't do anything more for this poor bastard. Martin glanced to the left and winced. The captain has been working in the open head of a guardswoman who might have been kind of pretty before something smashed through her face. She's brain dead. May the Emperor have mercy on you, child. The old Medicae made the sign of the Aquila over his patient and went to clean himself up. Give me the Inquisitor's status. I'll be there shortly. Right arm, lost at the shoulder, 2nd and 3rd degree burns in the area. However, the wound wasn't cauterized. Severe blood loss. A Medicae is providing transfusion as we speak. The wound was delivered by a demonic hellblade. What about taint? Martin grimaced. We have countermeasures. We'll need to see if they're effective. The captain sent Martin away, and he hurried up to see the Inquisitor. The man waited on a stretcher outside, under heavy guard. Several worse-to-wear blood ravens and guardsmen stood around the Inquisitor, ready to tear the head of anyone who looked at him the wrong way. Vale looked like the death warmed over. He was deadly pale, courtesy of a crude tourniquet and bandage on his right shoulder. His neck was exposed, and a Medicae had stuck an IV there attached to a blood bank. Right, the damn fool already got his other arm mangled and replaced with bionics. Martin got himself clean gloves and carefully removed the crude bandage to look at the wound, and grimaced. Prepare him for operation. I'll need to cut off some flesh around the wound at a minimum, then stitch him up until it's clear there's no taint. Celine comes with him. Prepare her to enter. A large Astartes ordered. His right arm was gone as well. Martin was sure he didn't want to know what they faced. Do you want me to keep him alive or not? He snapped when he saw an unnerving small armored figure hiding behind the Blood Raven. She's the countermeasure against taint. She'll be present alongside guards. You'll deal with it, Medicae. The Astartes growled dangerously, and Vaux rapidly nodded. That crazy Inquisitor was going to be the death of him. Eliphas's armored units had to quickly pull back behind the now dubious protection of the arcane defenses. His plan had been sound, he was sure of it. It came close to working too, only for those soulless machines to ruin it in the last possible moment. If it wasn't for their anti-warp tech, he might have pressed the counterattack anyway. However, taking out a number of those damnable pylons, not to mention summoning that many demons, took a toll upon his available sorcerers. They were running painfully low on sacrifices too. That was bad enough. The Skull-Taker taking the field had been unnerving. His appearance implied Eliphaz's patrons were less than happy with the current turn of events. Ujul failing his mission was unheard of. The corpse worshippers somehow managed to murder the favored herald of Khorne himself, and several lesser demons for good measure too. That rattled Eliphaz. Now, despite what most people believed, demons weren't immortal, not really. A number of artifacts could kill them. They often died in the warp, usually when defeated and consumed by something stronger. It was the way the corpse worshippers and the machines did it that would prove problematic. This wasn't some one-off event, the deed of a very powerful and rare artifact, not to mention purchased at a great price. What they did was something that could be replicated with relative ease, and that was going to be problematic. This disaster changed Eliphaz's calculations. He could no longer rely on a sufficient number of reinforcements. Any demons he threw at the enemy might be lost for good, which wasn't necessarily a problem as far as the endless hordes of lesser demons were concerned. There would always be more from where those spawned. The loss of the Skull-Taker was going to sting. He could feel Khorne's fury. The potential loss of the greater demon imprisoned on Kronus would be another great blow, one Eliphaz couldn't allow. Gather all my sorcerers and remaining sacrifices. Make sure that those allotted for the special ritual remain untouched. Eliphaz snarled at his minions. The Dark Apostle looked at the tactical map and glowered. The Necrons were busy gathering in ever-increasing numbers, and it wouldn't be long before they attempted to neutralize the arcane defenses. With those breached, the corpse worshippers would be free to attack as well. Then there were the Eldar. Their small but potent force was largely intact, and Slaanesh didn't get to enjoy a single soul from their numbers. The two guard regiments in the region fared worse. Predictably, however, there would be more where those came from. It wasn't like the Imperium would run out of cannon fodder. Eliphaz left the command center. It was time to get his primary objective done and depart while he still could. Turning Kronus into a demon world would have to wait. Part 2. Deimos Peninsula, Kronus. Colonel Fahid Roval found himself commanding the remaining guard-armored units on Kronus from the deck of a restored Baneblade. Usually, such magnificent machines didn't make good command vehicles. They had to be in the thick of battle if you used them right. A commander would lack sufficient awareness of the battlefield at large, and might be unable to effectively communicate and command. In this particular case, many crews politely refused to volunteer to serve on board the Baneblade due to the way it was restored. It was operational only due to the help of the Necron Xenos. They not only repaired the machine, but supplied various upgrades. Better armor, stronger drivetrain, more accurate weapons, and the Emperor only knew what nasty surprises they left behind. Initially, Colonel Roval was considering leaving the venerable machine behind. That way, the tech priests could properly study and restore it using good old-fashioned and reliable Imperial technology. Now he knew better. After he saw how they acted around the Xeno artifacts, Fahid left in a hurry, hugely disturbed by the experience. Going to General Alexander didn't help. The Lord Inquisitor was backing the unusual alliance with the Xenos to the hilt. Besides, they needed all the firepower they could get to face the traitors. After spending the last day within the Baneblade, Colonel Roval wasn't sure if he had been too paranoid or not paranoid enough. The machine ran like a charm. It obeyed every command with unnatural grace, shot with incredible precision, and its armor was unreal even for a vehicle of its class. There had to be a catch. A terrible surprise waiting to go off at the worst possible moment, right? Any such traps failed to materialize, and Colonel Roval had no more time to doubt himself or the Baneblade. The final assault upon the traitor positions was already beginning, and he would soon have to lead the Imperial armor into the breach. Multiple monitors showed crystal-clear Auspex feeds from the nearby front, where 3 huge Necron monoliths slowly advanced surrounded by infantry squares and floating destroyers. The sky was dark with Necron drones offering intelligence data, sweeping for heretical flyers, and ready to attack ground targets on command. It was an unnerving sight. After the battle against the Eldar and their Tau minions, Colonel Roval knew the Imperial Guard on Kronus scarcely had enough assets left to face such an onslaught, much less to fight traitors and heretics at the same time. He could see the Inquisitor had been right, that without the alliance, they all would be doomed. Yet, at the same time, a lifetime's experience cried to expect Xeno treachery. His heart rebelled at the thought of working with the alien. All the while, he was grateful that this alliance kept many of the people under his command alive. These were strange days to live in. The Necrons opened fire simultaneously. Lighting and emerald beams slammed into wicked sorceress defenses. Multiple regiments' worth of artillery opened fire, and explosions blossomed, slamming into an invisible wall. Whatever the heretics did lasted for a whole minute before the sorcery shattered like glass and the Xeno firepower struck true. Twisted, profane monuments disintegrated. Precise shots and drones intercepted heretic counter-battery efforts. The Necrons advanced with the bloody-minded determination and lack of fear that only machines could display. They were cold, methodical, and unrelenting. Drones descended in their thousands, and the horizon burned. Sword actual to all sword elements. We will advance now. Keep your wits and check your fire. We'll be explaining any friendly fire incidents to the Inquisition. Good hunting, and the Emperor bless you all. The Baneblade's engine purred to life. It was a far cry compared to the usual angry roar. The super-heavy tank accelerated faster and smoother than it had any right to be. For half an hour, the Imperial armor and the mechanized infantry accompanying it drove behind the Xenos, who crushed any and all resistance without slowing down. It was only when the crushed enemy defense lines were 15 kilometers behind them that they met stiff enough resistance to slow them down. Dug in traitor Astartes, demon-infested vehicles, and traitor guard regiments chose a low row of hills to make their stand. Far behind them, Auspexes could barely make up the mountain in the far end of the peninsula. The warp gate was over there, and to reach it, they had to crush the traitors in front of them. That was all right with Fahid. The Necron forces split in 3 groups, each formed around a single monolith. The Imperial formations drove into the available space and opened fire as soon as they were in range. It soon became clear why the Necrons slowed down. They dedicated a significant amount of their firepower to intercept incoming ordnance. That lowered their casualties significantly, yet slowed down the rate at which they could neutralize the enemy resistance. On the bright side, the proximity with the Xenos had 2 beneficial effects. First, the enemy focused their attention on the Necrons. Second, most welcome and unexpected, the aliens kept shooting shells and missiles heading the Imperial way. Colonel Roval didn't know what to think about that. It didn't make any bloody sense. He muttered a prayer to the Emperor and decided he didn't want to think about what passed for Xeno thought processes. Instead, he concentrated his attention on the battle. The Baneblade spat its fury, and with every shot, a traitor position went up in flame. A Lascanon glanced off the front glacis, heating it, but not penetrating. Secondary weapons peppered the heretics with explosive death, and secondary detonation marked their end. Insect-like demon engines crawled up the hills, bristling with spikes and weapons. Artillery and emerald beams lashed at them, tanks unleashed their fury, and several abominations blew up. The rest shot back, only for the Necrons to intercept almost all their corrupted shells. Even more, explosions lit up the shrinking space between the 3 armies, and the Baneblade rumbled, its battle cannon dismembering a heretic abomination with a direct hit. Eliphas stood in front of the last eager sacrifices he had left. In front of him, 7 sorcerers cut through the last prisoners and slaves he had access to. Their death screams and blood might just save his hide. The enemy had begun their final assault, and the only saving grace was that it had their attention focused at the wrong place. The Dark Apostle had his best troops holding the line, with the rabble ready to spend itself in one last counterattack. Their sole purpose would be to buy him time. Each sorcerer chanted in a different language, and each murdered a sacrifice differently. Blood flowed freely into the symbol of Chaos Undivided, carved into the soil. As soon as it was full, the blood ignited, and the space in the center of the symbol shimmered. Reality rippled and tore, forming a small warp portal. Move, do not slow down, do not listen to anyone or anything. Eliphas ordered and jumped into the portal. For a brief moment that lasted an eternity, he was in the warp, surrounded by demons writhing in agony. They clawed at a veil of searing light, and its very touch burned Eliphas's very soul. For a single double heartbeat, he could almost sense the corpse emperor, feel his contempt and boundless rage. Then he was through, and landed hard, falling face first into scorching sand. A few Astartes he could trust stumbled out next, followed by half the sacrifices and 2 sorcerers. Well, 3, but the last one came out engulfed by white flames, which quickly consumed him. Eliphas looked around. They were almost in position, and even if he had to sacrifice an Astartes or 2, he would have just enough sacrifices to get the job done. He felt a profound sense of relief and began barking orders to the sorcerers. There was no time to waste. Chapter 12, Parts 3 and 4. Chapter 12, Battlefield Kronus. Part 3, Ares Badlands. Kronus. Eliphas froze when a movement in the distance caught his eye. A group of corpse worshippers trudged up a sand dune and calmly looked around. A Necron drone buzzed overhead, and he felt despair. It couldn't end like this. He couldn't get back to the Basilica of Pain. The machine carried on, flying out of sight. The guardsmen kept walking, none the wiser. The Dark Apostle stared at them, staying frozen until one of the sorcerers let out a burst of choked laughter and pointed at something behind his back. Eliphas glowered at the witch, though still glanced over his shoulder. A weathered stone pillar rose from the sand. Only its top was visible. However, that was enough. Runes of protection and concealment glowed red with power and anger. An adherent of the primordial truth had been here before, sometime after Khorne's demon ended up imprisoned. While they were unable to free it, they had hidden the place from the unbelievers. Eliphas laughed as well. It wasn't over. He could still succeed. "Get working," he demanded. "We need to find the entrance to the prison." One sorcerer said and pointed at the sand below their feet. "We have to dig." Was there no end to the indignities he had to suffer? Eliphas wanted to scream, to rip and tear to pieces the offending sorcerer. However, he needed the bastard. He needed the worst to wear sacrifices alive as well. "Don't just stand there," he snapped at the remaining Astartes. "Get digging." And so he began to dig as well. Field Hospital, Victory Bay, Kronus. It was warm and comfortable. It felt like home. Home, I couldn't even remember what or where that was. There was only war and duty. I cracked my eyes open, and they felt like stuffed with cotton. All my senses felt like I was stuck up in a cocoon. What did I do to myself this time? I charged a demon, didn't I? Didn't I promise to myself not to do something this dumb again? "Inquisitor, you're awake," a familiar and comforting voice rumbled. Turning my head to the right was harder than it should have been. Slower, too. I blinked owlishly at Antaeus. He sat near my bed in an oversized chair that somehow managed to support his bulk. His right arm was gone. Seeing him that way sent a pang of pain in my shoulder, and I glanced down. There were a lot of snow-white bandages I could see. "Did I get my arm cut off too?" I croaked. "You charged the skull-taker like an emperor-damned fool." Antaeus rumbled. He glared briefly at me until something warm stirred at my side, and he relented. I turned my head to the left, and a few blinks later I could recognize a mop of dark hair sticking out of a cocooned standard-issue blanket. I stared at the kid sleeping at my side and looked questionably at Antaeus. If the Emperor's merciful, she's taking care of any warp taint we picked up when that thing dismembered us. Your commissar friend is recovering in the next room and should be under Celine's effect as well. I presume that we won? We did more than that. Antaeus cracked a rare smile. We faced the skull-taker himself and either banished it or killed it for good. We're unsure which yet. He sat straighter and all but shone with pride as he told me this. Skull-taker, don't ring a bell. I couldn't recall hearing about this particular monster before. Herald of Khorne, a nasty piece of work. Murdered several Grey Knights during the First War of Armageddon. Even just banishing it back to the warp that spawned it won you many favors, Inquisitor. If we managed to kill the beast for good. Antaeus' smile became wistful. That was the point of the exercise, I pointed out. Indeed, in related news as we speak, our forces are clearing up the primary defense lines leading to the warp portal. They'll need time to replenish supplies, conduct repairs, and strengthen anti-warp wards. However, by this time tomorrow, we should begin our final assault. He looked pointedly at me. Neither of us will participate. At best, we might observe from the safety of the General's command center here in Victory Bay. I nodded lightly. I could live with that. Spars invade our kill cruiser. A mech boy screamed in agony while Captain Bloodfang de Bloody smashed his power claw into his back. He did so repeatedly and with great vigor. Captain Bloodfang wasn't a happy orc, and when Captain Bloodfang wasn't happy, he made sure his boys knew it as it was proper. The captain hasn't been happy for weeks now. He missed the war on the planet below. He missed slamming his cruiser into Hummy ships and hearing them break. Most of all, he missed having almost enough Dakar at his beck and call. Bloodfang missed having working engines too, because without engines you couldn't invade. Everyone knew that. That's why Bloodfang had his crew paint the cruiser red, and if the remaining mech boys couldn't fix their engines, he would have them out pushing. He wanted war, damn it. Captain, it's our boss. The comms boy hollered from the comms console, where the mech boys had him stuck after he got his legs cut. Boss. Bloodfang bit off the ear of the unfortunate mech boy and hollered with a bloody smile. Bloodfang, you spawn of a squig. Gorguts roared back. Get your scrap piles moving. We're attacking the Hummies. Ram their city. Invade them. Wah! Wah! Bloodfang roared back. He would let the slight go this time. He wasn't the spawn of a squig, damn it. His spores came from a squiggoth that got stuck on a kill cruiser. It was a really tasty squiggoth too. Driver, drive us into the Hummies. Comboy, call the fleet. We're moving. Ramming speed. We're invading. Wah! Wah! Bridge Armageddon Blood Raven Strike Cruiser. The crew on watch observed the battle on the surface with great trepidation. While occasionally Imperium forces had to ally with Xenos to achieve their objectives and combat greater threats, this alliance of convenience was particularly onerous. First, there was the treacherous Eldar, who not a week earlier fought against the blessed forces of the Imperium. Then there were the Necrons, damned machines who until now had brought only death to every world they touched. As if that wasn't bad enough, there was a massive chaos infestation down there, one the fleet might have to purge with orbital fire when it became feasible. Captain Stephen Ignatius couldn't wait for that blessed moment. Captain, thermal blooms, the orcs are on the move. An Auspex operator reported. Verify that, battle stations. Ignatius barked and coaxed the machine spirit to feed live data into his implants. Sure enough, the shattered remains of the Orc fleet were on the move. Data feed on the Imperial fleet in orbit, satellites and ground stations soon gave him a comprehensive picture of what the beasts were doing. Captain, the kill cruiser's engines remain crippled. The beasts have a rocket strapped to its back. The Auspex operator trailed off. Are they pushing it? It's the Orcs. Such insanity works for them. Have the auxiliary vessels maneuver behind us. 37th Destroyer Squadron will remain on station protecting them, along with the cruiser Swift Retribution. Hopefully that would be enough to keep the Tau Squadron honest. Have Vengeance form up on our starboard side, launch small craft. Ignatius had to keep that side covered. It suffered heavy damage during the engagement with the Eldar, then even more while they reduced the Tau fleet. Enemy vessels are maneuvering. The captain cursed. Even before the tactical hololith could update itself, his implants told him what the beasts intended. Full military power to engines. Weapons, the kill cruiser is the primary target. We can't let them get through. The Orcs weren't moving to engage his command or even flee. They shifted to a lower orbit and, if not stopped, would crash into Victory Bay, causing untold devastation. Part 4. Kronus. A flight of torpedoes raced to meet the approaching Orcs. At this range, their purpose was little more to force the green-skinned ships to break formation and make their attempt to hit Victory Bay that much harder. The Orcs being Orcs, they refused to break what passed for the formation and instead opened fire at the incoming ordnance. Most of it went wide, however. A handful of warheads detonated prematurely due to sheer bloody luck. A few more were missed due to the extreme range. The remaining torpedoes hit, and scattered explosions illuminated the Orc battle group. The kill cruiser tanked 3 warheads, its void shields mostly held, yet despite that, it began venting atmosphere and debris. A destroyer broke in 2, spilling its screaming crew into the void, while melter warheads incinerated a second one. The Orcs kept going, while the Imperial task force raced to intercept them. Meanwhile, on the surface, powerful Necron sensors noticed the drama unfolding in space and relayed the newest development to the Necron Lord. He spent a few moments calculating possible outcomes before issuing orders. A pair of immense structures within the heart of the Necron stronghold slowly came to life, and powerful targeting sensors bathed everything above the hemisphere. At that point, the Tau battle group stirred as well, after detecting the power emanations and ghostly backslash for the Necron sensors. The anti-orbital Gauss weapons greedily drank all the energy they could from capacitors and fields of power generators before firing. Thick bolts of emerald lighting tore the atmosphere asunder and laid waste to anything unprotected by necrodermis in the vicinity of the Necron stronghold. A shockwave scattered the clouds above the region. Mortals heard and felt the aftershocks of the firing across the continent. An Orc destroyer vanished, engulfed by a Gauss bolt larger than it was wide. When the shot dissipated, there wasn't even a trace of the escort vessel. The kill cruiser was marginally more fortunate. Due to distance and its erratic descent, not to mention more formidable if primitive defenses, it survived. The Necron weapon scored a glancing hit that stripped off its void shields, blew up their generator from sheer feedback, then roughly disintegrated the rear third of the vessel. The kill cruiser entered uncontrolled spin shortly before hitting the atmosphere and igniting. While not destroyed, its trajectory would lead it far away from Victory Bay, which was more than enough for the Necrons. The Imperial task force, led by the Armageddon, kept their emergency burn and continued to target the smaller Orc ships. Spars in Vadar, kill cruiser. Captain Bloodfang picked himself from the deck and spat a broken fang. This was not good. His trusty ship spun, which was kind of fun. It burned, which was less so. It was falling apart too, which was plain bad. Real bad. The Orc grabbed a nearby console with his power claw and gingerly got up spitting teeth. "Lads, we're abandoning ship," Bloodfang grumbled. "We're invading from up here now." It was certainly better than burning. Besides, the comms boy would be going down with the ship to preserve Orcish owner. Wagf. The cry from the nearby crew was less than enthusiastic. It had something to do with most of them rolling around and hitting all kinds of stuff. It was their fault for not having Propar power claws. "Tudor assault pods," Bloodfang roared in irritation. He punched, kicked, and dragged his boys to the pods so they could invade in Propar Orky way. Soon the falling to pieces and burning kill cruiser began eagerly spilling even more scrap piles. Some of them even had working rocket engines that propelled them towards prospective targets. Higher up in orbit, the remaining Orc ships followed suit. Some died under Imperial guns. A few others managed to enter the atmosphere and survive long enough for their crews to aim them at large settlements and jump before precise lance strikes began breaking them up. Orcs raiding parties and burning debris rained from the Janus Savannah all the way to Victory Bay. The kill cruiser spun wildly off course and headed in the rough direction of the Tau capital of Oris Tashan, prompting an immediate response by the Tau warships. While Tau plasma and railgun slugs soon forced the ship to largely disintegrate, most of its mass continued on its fiery path. Even though the Tau managed to break up all larger chunks, their capital still suffered the equivalent of light and dispersed orbital strike, complete with dozens of small Orc parties landing all over the place. In contrast, the Imperial ships had a longer window of opportunity to break up the Orcs' suicidal charge. Debris still struck Victory Bay, however. There was nothing big enough to cause more than cosmetic damage. A number of assault pods were the exception, surviving long enough to crash into the city against all odds. Field Hospital, Victory Bay, Kronus. Finally, having a brief period of rest and relaxation felt nice, even if I had to spend it under close observation in the hospital. Apparently, I still had a bit of luck to burn, because no one could find chaos corruption in what was left of my shoulder. Just a really nasty wound and even nastier burns. Those didn't bother me thanks to a lot of good drugs. I was either catching up on sleep or trying to coax Celine into talking, which was kind of relaxing. I waved a steaming cup of sweet goodness with my bionic hand in front of the kid. Selene, I repeated slowly. I know you can say it, sweetie. A pair of huge eyes kept tracking the local variety of cocoa with the precision of an emperor's blessed hydra. It turned out that the beverage was a local specialty usually reserved for the high and mighty, with said traitorous bastards either very dead, waiting to be killed in the Deimos Peninsula, or cowering behind the robes of their Tau masters. A lot of their assets came into the possession of the proper authorities, which meant the Imperial Guard, Mechanicus, and yours truly. While most of us were busy fighting the Emperor's enemies, a contingent of arbiters with proper supervision had been going over everything confiscated with all available equipment and commendable zeal. In turn, everything considered safe or in need of a further review changed official ownership. I was pretty sure that all the cocoa and other bits and ends that ended up on my name were a not too subtle attempt to keep me distracted and on the locals' good side. The logical conclusion was the bastards had a lot to hide. They had to be investigated when the time permitted. Thankfully, that wouldn't be my problem, or it would be, which might be better. In the meantime, I had a few 100 kilos of the best honey-flavored cocoa available. Needless to say, Selene approved, and so did my diminished retinue. Say it, and you'll get another cup. I tried to entice her with a warm beverage. Selene made grabby hands at it, but still refused to utter a single word. I raised the cup higher and looked pointedly at her. The kid pouted and kept looking up at the cocoa. Her expression turned heartbroken, and I sighed, wondering what in the Emperor's name was I doing. She lit up like the Astronomicon when I gave her the cup and proceeded to drain it in one go, as if afraid someone would take it away. That was something that had happened to her a lot in the past, I guessed. After finishing the drink, Selene curled around the cup, as if it was precious, and went to sleep. It was a stark reminder that her childhood had been a horror story. I grimaced at that thought and went back to rest. The respite didn't last. Invasion and air raid sirens brought me out of a pleasant nap. I got up on instinct, nearly spilling Selene off the bed to her silent indignation. The room's door slammed open, and a wide-eyed Santo stumbled inside. "Sir, we need to get you to safety," my chief bodyguard exclaimed. "Help me up and give me a weapon," I grumbled, and tried to untangle myself from the sheets and medical equipment stuck all over me. "What's the situation?" "The Orc fleet's on the move. They're heading straight for us. The Navy is moving in to intercept." Emperor damned green-skinned bastards. Despite the danger, it took significant time to get cleared to leave the hospital. Despite my rank, the danger of chaos corruption was no joke. It took getting Selene outside under Santos's supervision so one of General Alexander's mindfuckers could examine us. I don't know if it was the Munchkin, the Necron Tech, or both. However, the three of us, yours truly, Antius and Charles, got the all clear for the time being. I knew there would be a regular examination in the future, and we would be lucky to get away with just that. The only silver lining was that Sergeant Bronn was alive, somehow intact, and turned up loaded with weapons and gear. The Ogrin beamed when he saw us up and about and began babbling something about smashing orcs. Weber wasted no time and grabbed a belt with a chainsword, then faltered, wondering how to quickly put it on with one arm. "Help us get a damn armor on," I admonished my security detail. "Santos, the status of the orcs?" "The Necrons took out their cruiser. It's breaking up and heading for the Tau capital. Several destroyers are still on the way here, and the Navy is shooting at them. They're unlikely to stop them all from making planetfall. We're getting to a bunker. Once the immediate threat of bombardment is over, we'll figure out what to do," I decided. Chapter 12, Parts 5 and 6. Chapter 12, Battlefield Kronus. Part 5, Victory Bay, Kronus. By the time we could get away from the hospital, all hell had broken loose above Victory Bay. The sky burned with falling stars, and each one of them was a deadly piece of orcish scrap. That or orcs coming in to kill as many people as they could. The shattered remnants of the Aeronautica Imperialis raised to meet them, just a handful of bare, airworthy fighters. Missile contrails flew upwards, followed by a long burst of flak from hydras. Sonic booms thundered like artillery, and the first scattered debris reached the city, damaging buildings and scything through unlucky bastards. "And thus the attack of the mushrooms begins," I muttered, quoting something barely remembered that dashed through my mind. "We aren't making it to a proper bunker," Lieutenant Picos exclaimed. Somehow she was still alive, mostly intact, and back in Victory Bay as a part of my security detail. From what little I could glean, most of her unit didn't make it. There were a lot of new and young faces among the troopers surrounding us. Most of them had expressions of disbelief, complete with widened eyes staring at the spectacle above us. "We need hard cover now," Antia's voice boomed. It sliced through the roar of deorbiting debris and shook us all. "The grumpy librarian is right. Find cover first, watch fireworks second, kill orcs third," I added, putting as much authority in my voice as I could. To my dying breath, I will deny croaking a suggestion instead of giving an order in the best inquisitorial fashion. "What the Inquisitor said," Charles rasped. He had the chainsword hanging off a belt slung over his shoulder and a las pistol in hand. In that regard, he was similar to Antaeus. My blood-raven buddy got a bolt pistol from the Ogrin, along with a belt with a dagger that would pass muster as a short sword if you were a normal-sized fellow. I had to make do with an ill-fitted carapace chestplate and yet another chainsword. All things considered, it was a good thing we had at least a guard platoon, complete with vehicles, even if some of them were likely greener than the orcs coming to kill us all. I wasn't going to look at this particular gift too closely. It was most certainly not good that said vehicles were rather useless as far as getting us to relative safety. The streets were chock full with screaming people running to safety, while groups of more level-headed citizens tried to cling together while doing the same. Not a small group of citizens fell to their knees when they saw us and began praying for salvation, as if any of us could simply wave a hand and make the debris go away. "The Emperor's light shines upon us. Salvation is at hand." A bare-chested priest screamed in rapture. His eyes burned with fanaticism, and he gleefully waved a brand of incense around. "Ave Emperor," his followers chorused. "Inquisitor, your talk with the priests have been very effective, I see." I could barely hear Charles's dry voice over the chanting, screaming, and explosions. "Make us a way, good people of the Imperium." I tried to bullshit our way through the gathering crowd. With every passing moment, more and more people joined it, instead of doing the sensible thing and running away to a shelter. Instead of scattering and dispersing, the crowd swelled, and soon all that kept me, Antaeus, and Charles away from being swamped was a very thin line of guardsmen and a pair of Necrons. I looked around for Selene and saw her on the shoulders of one of her alien guards, waving at the crowd. Some people recoiled from the sight, and for a moment I was sure we would have a fanaticism-fueled riot on our hands. We might get torn to pieces by our damn people too, and wouldn't that be an inglorious end? "This is a test from the Emperor," the priest screeched. Damn, that bastard had a drill instructor's lungs on him. "Trust your faith, not what you feel," he raved. "Here stands blessed Demon's Bane and his cohort." Demon's Bane! Av Emperor, Av Inquisitor. "Fuck my life. At least your fan club is going strong," Charles exclaimed. That was rich coming from my chief fanboy. "Weber, I swear to the Emperor, if you had anything to do with this," I hissed back while giving the crowd my best reassuring smile. "Inquisitor, look!" Antaeus roared and pointed at something above us. His voice managed to cut through the chanting of the mob, if barely. Many shining eyes looked at where he was pointing, and a stir went through the crowd. Several crude drop pods fell towards the city. In the distance, fiery lances pierced the heavens from orbit and picked up larger pieces of debris. The only reason we could see that much in the first place was the location of the field hospital, in one of the many open-air parks in Victory Bay. AA emplacements shifted their fire, and a pair of lighting interceptors vectored their way. Instead of running, the crowd surrounding us went wild at the spectacle. A missile hit one pod, tearing a large chunk of it and sending it spinning out of control. Flak bracketed multiple pods. Heap shells bit into their armor and soon tore open a few of the pods. Screaming orcs tumbled all over the city. The interceptors made a good pass using las cannons, and 2 pods turned into burning slag raining upon the city. Yet there has more been coming. Instead of slowing down, the damn things accelerated. Some opened, and orcs began jumping out. A few of them even had crude rocket packs strapped to their backs. 3 pods in particular concerned me. They flew towards us low and fast. One didn't make it. The pod clipped a tall building, spun, and then plowed through another at a steep angle. The crash was deafening, and the resulting collapse covered a whole district in dust and shattered glass. An interceptor flew perilously low, and shortly before the pods reached us, shot one, neatly spearing it. The bright laser bolt passed harmlessly over our heads, and with a bit of luck, it wouldn't hit anything important. The last pod kept on flying, rockets activated at its front, slowing it down just before it passes above us. A couple of dozen orcs or so jumped out, brandishing all kinds of weapons. Waga! Explosions, rocket roar, and orcish war cries momentarily silenced the crowd while we were helpless to anything but watch. At them, for the Emperor, for the Inquisitor. The crazy priest roared right back at the orcs while they landed into the crowd with predictably gruesome results. Let's go save those fools, for the Emperor. I pulled out my sword and revved it up. And someone get Selene out of here. Part 6. Victory Bay, Kronus. Metric fuck-tons of orcs landing in the middle of a fired-up crowd. Only one way this could end. The only thing I found particularly concerning among the unfolding insanity was how banal it all was. The fountains of blood and gore erupting with every impact produced by landing orcs were just there, little more than window dressing. The screams, the coppery stench of fresh blood and shit, those were marginally more effective in affecting me. They all paled in comparison at the sheer fury I felt at the fools running to their death, the same fools countless good men and women died to keep safe. Move, damn you! I screamed as loud as I could, which wasn't very. While I wasn't exactly as weak as a kitten, I had no business getting stuck right into this mess. Yet this was my fucking job. It was my Emperor-given duty to stand between the regular citizens of the Imperium and all the horrors who would gleefully butcher them or worse. Like that huge laughing enthusiast who managed to cover himself with guts and wore them like demon bait. The fucker was coming straight at me, and I was painfully aware I had a tiny chainsword to meet him. I had a bionic arm too, which helped because I was sure otherwise my fingers would be trembling. The orc roared at me, the sheer power of the sound forcing me to stumble a step back. Then he looked down, where a bunch of crazed fanatics had a go at him, mostly unarmed. A quick swipe with a crude axe turned the poor bastards in mincemeat. As if that wasn't a fuck-up enough, a little kid stumbled out of the crowd, crying. Right in the way of the orc, because someone up there hated me. I could vaguely make Pico's cursing her people and kicking them into gear. "Hey, ugly!" I screamed at the brute, whose tiny eyes focused on me. "Charles, get the kid. Antias!" Another roar came from the right, then a missile flew above the crowd and slammed at something behind us. The explosion was close enough to rattle my bones and ensure all I could hear was a dull screech. At least Santos was on the ball, and coherent light lanced at the orc, barely phasing it. A hand grabbed at me, succeeding in holding me back. I saw Weber sprint towards the kid, all the while shooting at the orc. The damn thing barely slowed down, and at that rate, there could be only one result. I cursed whoever pulled me back to the depth of the warp, and speaking of it, it was like veil lifting. Suddenly, I could feel the immaterium and the golden cage cast over Kronus. "Thank you, Emperor," I muttered a prayer, and heedless for the dangers, drank deeply from the power waiting for me. It flowed into me like a river, and with the warp came the screams of countless frenzied demons baying for my soul. There were large things moving over there, just beyond the barrier, and every single one of them had their attention on me. I could swear I heard hounds howling for my blood, and immediately knew that I should close myself to the immaterium. Instead, I channeled the power bubbling within me into an ethereal lighting bolt and sent it at the greenskin, ponderously charging at Charles. I saw in slow motion how the commissar dropped his pistol and skid to a painful stop beside the kid. He grabbed the child with his hand and slowly, oh so slowly, began to turn around. He wasn't going to make it. Thankfully, my warp attack changed the equation. The lightning bolt struck the orc into the chest, burning through its scrap armor. It stumbled, nearly tumbling down, yet kept standing. Last bolts kept taking chunks off it, yet the damned mushroom refused to die. Right, Vital spots could be anywhere in the body. The guard finally did something useful. A multi-laser spoke and caught the brute in the leg, vaporizing most of it. The orc finally fell, and instead of dying, it began crawling our way. The world sped up. The pressure into my head increased, and I was about to let go of the warp when a second, even larger and better armored orc exploded from the frenzied mob. The screaming upper torso of the priest flew past me and struck someone right behind me, showering me with blood. I caught a glimpse of another missile, which flew true. A multi-laser burst, cut short, struck the crowd behind the charging orc, adding to the butchery. The damned mushroom saw Charles and for some reason decided that the commissar would make a good chew toy. Or perhaps it was in a battle frenzy, focusing on everything in its path. It didn't matter. It ran at Weber, and the scattered shots hitting it merely blasted away pieces of armor. I didn't think, just ran, pulling as much power as I could. It was right there, the cleansing light, and I grabbed at it. Demons roared, I could feel them clawing at my soul even as they burned. Suddenly, I was in front of Charles, standing before his retreating form. The orc slashed at me with a sword better fit for Terminator, and I somehow managed to get my chainsword up just in time. Parrying the strike was a bad idea. It brought me to my knees and wrenched the weapon from my bionic grip. The orc roared at me in fury, and I roared right back. My world was fire. It was light and pain. There was an ugly Xeno in front of me, and I wanted it to go away. I didn't think. I couldn't. I could smell my blood boiling, a huge form roaring in triumph as its clawed fingers closed around my very soul. Someone, looked at me from very far away. For the second time in my life, I beheld divinity. Kaurava, Aurelia. Those words burned themselves into my soul. For a moment they were everything, the only thing keeping my mind from shattering when an impossibly powerful, familiar and comforting presence overwhelmed everything I was. Those words, they were a price I had to repay. A demon screamed at being denied, and countless others chorused in an infernal cacophony. I burned and died, only to burn again and reform. All my world was golden fire. It burned down and rebuilt my soul. Once again, I felt a fraction of the agony the Emperor experienced every single moment for the past 10,000 years. The agony and understanding of what he on Holy Terror sacrificed and continued to sacrifice for every single one of us were humbling. It was eye-opening, a lesson and a pledge engraved upon my soul. I held a sword of golden fire, crafted of the Emperor's own power. Plunging the blade into the orc standing frozen above me was the most reasonable and natural thing in the world. Golden fire engulfed the Xeno and purged it from the surface of Kronus. I stared blankly at the ghostly, transparent arm holding the blade. I blinked, and it began fading away, along with the fiery sword. The next thing I knew, I was surrounded by countless moths of fire, which flew up to become a part of the radiance surrounding Kronus. Some of them slowly changed direction and headed my way, becoming tiny silver strings connecting me to the people around. It was faith, pure, unthinking faith. It was power. I could taste it. The refined hopes and dreams of humanity itself. Its fear and rage, its pain and cry for salvation. I knew I wasn't worthy of it, not when it was aimed my way. I could do nothing less but answer those cries, even as I basked into the faith of those crying for salvation. What happened next was a sheer instinct. I gathered the power filling me and unleashed it, answering the cries of those nearby. Pure golden energy cascaded from my form, touching everything around me. The crowd staggered. In a single act, I vindicated their belief and proved it true. The wisps of faith feeding the Emperor, the same tiny strings now attached to my very soul, thickened a bit, becoming firmer, almost tangible. For a moment, it was a two-way street. I poured more power into the connection. Wounds healed, shattered bones mended. And the remaining orcs, they fell upon a tide of humanity, surrounded by divine radiance. Whatever I just did took almost everything I had to give. I fell on my hands and knees, staring at the blood-soaked ground. The power surging through me was too much, and I had no idea how to control it. Worse, or perhaps it was for the best, the distant beacon that was the Emperor kept looking at me. For a split second, I served as a beacon too, and a tide of his divinity clashed into the immaterium surrounding Kronus. Demons beyond numbers had a mere moment to see the annihilation coming at them, and then they burned. I was a mere pawn in a greater war. That much I knew. A war I unwittingly escalated with my presence, and now it was time to pay the piper. The Emperor's attention waned, and I crashed hard. The shower of divine power dried out. The last thing I saw was Celine, holding a single snow-white feather. She looked straight at me, with her soulful gold-specked eyes, and smiled. My eyes closed, and I fell into an uneasy slumber.